the mahogany doors of Courtroom. 7 swung open with a force that made every head turn. Margaret Chen, the city's most expensive defense attorney, stormed out mid-session, her Louboutins clicking against marble like gunshots. Behind her, through those same doors, sat her client, tech millionaire, Vincent Hargrove, alone at the defendant's table, his face drained of color as the judge's gavel echoed through the chamber. Nobody saw it coming. Not the prosecutors smirking at their table, not the journalists scrambling for their phones, and certainly not the young janitor in the back row, still holding his cleaning cart, who would change everything in the next 60 seconds. Vincent Hargrove had built an empire from nothing. Hartech Solutions had revolutionized cloud computing, made him a fixture on Forbes lists, and filled his Boston penthouse with awards he never had time to appreciate. But success, he'd learned in the past 6 months, could vanish faster than it arrived. The embezzlement charges were serious, $4.7 million, allegedly siphoned from company accounts. Vincent knew he was innocent, that his former CFO had orchestrated the entire scheme, but proving it was another matter entirely. The evidence had been masterfully manipulated, digital trails rerouted to make Vincent look guilty. He'd hired Margaret Chen because she was the best, paying her retainer of $250,000 without blinking. Now she was gone. Your Honor, the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Rollins, stood with barely concealed glee. It appears the defense counsel has departed. Perhaps Mr. Hargrove would like to request a continuance? Judge Morrison peered over his glasses, his expression somewhere between bewildered and annoyed. Mr. Hargrove, where is your attorney? Vincent stood, his throat tight. 6 months ago, he could command a boardroom of 200 investors. Today, he could barely find his voice. I don't know, Your Honor. She was just here and then... She left because she knows he's guilty, Rollins interjected smoothly. Even his own lawyer won't defend him. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Vincent felt the walls closing in. This was it. The moment his life would be defined, not by the companies he'd built or the jobs he'd created, but by a crime he didn't commit. Your Honor, that's not true! The voice came from the back of the courtroom, young and trembling but determined. Every eye turned to see Marcus Webb stepping forward, pushing his cleaning cart aside. At 24, Marcus had worked as a janitor at the courthouse for 3 years, invisible to most people who passed him daily. He wore his maintenance uniform, navy blue, with his name stitched over the pocket, and his hands shook as he walked down the center aisle. Young man, Judge Morrison frowned. This is a court of law, not a public forum. Please return to... I know Mr. Hargrove didn't do this, Marcus interrupted. Vincent stared at the young man approaching the defense table. He'd never seen him before in his life. Marcus, isn't it? The judge's tone softened slightly. I understand you want to help, but unless you're a licensed attorney... I'm not, Marcus admitted, reaching the railing. He turned to face the courtroom, his voice growing steadier. But I know what integrity looks like, and Mr. Hargrove has it. 3 years ago, I was homeless, living in my car, barely scraping by. I came to this courthouse looking for work, any work. The HR department turned me away because I didn't have a permanent address. He looked at Vincent, who still appeared completely confused. You were here for a civil case, Marcus continued. Something about a patent dispute. I was sitting outside on the steps, trying to figure out where I'd sleep that night. And you came out after your hearing. You asked if I was okay. I told you the truth, that I'd been rejected for the janitor position because I was homeless. You know what you did? Vincent's eyes widened as a memory surfaced, hazy but real. You called the courthouse administrator right there on the steps, Marcus said, his voice cracking with emotion. You told them you'd personally vouch for me, that you'd provide a reference. You gave me the deposit for an apartment, $2,000 cash from your wallet, and told me to pay it forward someday. You said every person deserves a chance to prove themselves. The courtroom had gone completely silent. I got the job, Marcus said. I got the apartment. I got my life back. And in 3 years, Mr. Hargrove never once mentioned it. Never asked for anything back. Never treated me like I owed him. I don't think he even remembered me until right now. Vincent felt something break loose in his chest. He did remember now, a young man on the courthouse steps, desperate and honest. It had been such a small thing, barely a blip in his day. Your Honor. Marcus turned back to the judge. I may not be a lawyer, but I've cleaned this courthouse for 3 years. I've seen a lot of people come through those doors. I've seen the guilty ones. They have a look, a way of carrying themselves. Mr. Hargrove doesn't have that. And a man who helps a homeless stranger without expecting anything in return isn't the kind of man who steals from his own company. This is highly irregular, Judge Morrison said, but his tone had shifted. May I approach, Your Honor? A new voice rang out. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit stood from the gallery. Leonard Winters, criminal defense attorney. I've been observing this case with interest, and I'd like to offer my services to Mr. Hargrove pro bono. Before the judge could respond, another person stood. Rebecca Martinez, forensic accountant. I'd like to volunteer my expertise in reviewing the financial evidence. Then another. And another. Within 2 minutes, 5 professionals had offered to help Vincent's defense, moved by Marcus's testimony. Prosecutor Rollins looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. Your Honor, this is a circus. No, Ms. Rollins, Judge Morrison interrupted. This is what happens when character speaks louder than accusations. I'm granting a 2-week continuance to allow Mr. Hargrove to assemble proper counsel. And, young man, he looked at Marcus, that was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've seen in 30 years on the bench, possibly both. Marcus nodded, his legs suddenly weak. I just couldn't let it happen, sir. Not to him. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Leonard Winters and his new team of volunteers tore through the evidence with fresh eyes. Rebecca Martinez discovered what the original investigators had missed, a sophisticated scheme that had routed transactions through multiple offshore accounts, all bearing digital signatures that had been cleverly forged using Vincent's credentials. The real culprit, former CFO Richard Brennan, had already fled to a country without extradition, but the evidence of his guilt was overwhelming. When they reconvened, Patricia Rollins stood with notably less confidence. In light of new evidence brought to our attention, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Vincent Hargrove. The judge's gavel fell. Case dismissed. Vincent couldn't speak. He stood there as the courtroom erupted in murmurs, as Leonard pumped his hand in congratulation, as reporters shouted questions. But his eyes found Marcus, standing by his cleaning cart in the back, preparing to return to work as if he hadn't just saved a man's life. Vincent pushed through the crowd and pulled the young man into an embrace. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for seeing me when no one else would. Marcus pulled back, tears in his eyes. You saw me first, Mr. Hargrove, on those steps. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. I was just returning the favor. 6 months later, Marcus Webb enrolled in Knight Law School, his tuition paid by a scholarship fund. Vincent had established for courthouse employees pursuing higher education. Margaret Chen faced disbarment proceedings for abandoning her client. Richard Brennan was eventually apprehended and extradited, facing charges far more serious than those Vincent had beaten. But Vincent never forgot the real lesson from that. Day in Courtroom 7. Success could be measured in stock prices and profit margins, but character was measured in moments, in choosing to help a stranger on courthouse steps, in risking your job to defend someone you barely knew, in remembering that every person carries an inherent dignity worth protecting. The mahogany doors of Courtroom 7 had witnessed thousands of cases, but they'd never seen anything quite like this. A janitor with a cleaning cart defending a millionaire, and in doing so, proving that kindness is the most powerful,